not that all lives don't matter, but right now, our lives matter. Black lives matter.
Yes.
Black trans lives matter.
Yes.
Trans lives matter.
Yes.
Because guess what? We all minorities, but right now, like, let's focus on the person who got killed. Tony McDade was a...
Some stories don't start with a scream. They start quietly, beneath the surface. In the routines of everyday life. A missed call. A light left on. A voice that suddenly goes quiet. And for a while, no one notices. It's the kind of silence that doesn't raise alarms at first. Maybe someone's just resting. Maybe their phone died. Maybe they're taking space. But then comes the stillness. A kind of pause that presses into the people around them. The unanswered texts. The familiar footsteps that don't return. In a small corner of a southern city, something shifted. People who were once present, visible, active, alive, began to fade from view. There were no flashing headlines. No media frenzies. Just small circles of concern widening slowly into questions. Where are they? Why hasn't anyone heard from them? Some walked the same streets looking for signs. Others stayed glued to their phones, refreshing updates that never came. But something had already happened. Something that would take time to uncover. In places people pass every day, the ordinary became something else entirely. Doors stayed closed. Answers stayed hidden. And all around, life continued. But beneath that surface, the weight of something unspoken was growing. This isn't a story that begins with chaos. It begins with a whisper. With small decisions. Forgotten moments. And somewhere in that space, something irreversible took shape. You're watching Crime That Haunts, a channel dedicated to the real cases that cut deeper than headlines, the stories that stay with you long after the footage fades. We examine the evidence, retrace the timeline, and revisit the lives affected, not for spectacle, but because some stories demand to be told with care. If you're new here, consider subscribing. Leave a comment below to tell us which case you believe still needs answers, or deserves to be heard. Tonight, we turn to Tallahassee, Florida. A place known for politics, students, community service, and in 2020, protest. In the span of 1 week, 2 women, one just beginning her adulthood, the other well into her elder years, disappeared. Separate lives. Separate paths. But their absence would unravel something far larger than anyone expected. What happened next would leave a city shaken, a movement interrupted, and 2 families left with questions that justice alone cannot answer. Tallahassee, Florida. The state capital. A city shaped by 2 universities, years of politics, oak-lined streets, and long, humid summers. In June 2020, the air there was heavy, not just from the heat, but from unrest. Across the nation, people were marching. Crying out. Holding signs. Demanding that someone, somewhere, finally listen. In the heart of that wave was a 19-year-old woman, Oluwatoyin Solo. To those who knew her, she was more than just a protester. She was a voice. Nigerian American. Fierce, young, unapologetically hopeful. She stood at podiums, on sidewalks, in front of city halls, reciting names, speaking truth, channeling her grief into momentum. Just months before, she was a student, studying, growing, still searching. But something changed. Something in the air, in the streets, called her forward. She became one of the loudest voices in Tallahassee's Black Lives Matter protests, often speaking with no script, no paper in hand, only conviction. Her speeches went viral. People listened. She told the world she was tired. She told them she was scared. But she kept going anyway. Her face, framed by braids, became a symbol in the city, not of what had already happened, but of what she hoped might still be possible. Just a few miles away, another woman was living a very different life. Victoria Sims, or Vicky, as friends called her, was 75 years old. A retired state employee. A grandmother. A dedicated volunteer for the AARP and other community groups. She had spent much of her life quietly helping others, whether through charity drives, senior outreach, or simply offering rides to those without transportation. Vicky was known as generous, patient, the kind of woman who still mailed birthday cards and checked on her neighbors. She lived alone, comfortably. Her routines were steady. Her door was always open to those she trusted. If Toyin represented youth and fire, Vicky stood for something else: longevity, consistency, quiet strength. On paper, they seemed like strangers. They didn't work together. They didn't come from the same community. One was stepping into adulthood. The other had lived through decades of change. But Tallahassee is a city with short distances. One decision, one ride, one encounter, and paths that never should have crossed, can. The only thread between them, at this point in the story, was time. Early June. A stretch of days where both women were known, seen, active. Where nothing yet seemed wrong. But something was already forming outside the frame. Quietly. And no one was watching yet. It was Saturday, June 6, 2020. The sun was beginning to fade over Tallahassee, but the streets were still full. The heat hadn't broken, and neither had the protests. Oluwatoyin Salo had been active that day. She had marched, she had spoken. Her voice was firm, her energy unwavering. But something had happened. That evening, she opened her phone and wrote a message. It wasn't loud. It wasn't part of a speech. It was a tweet. Short. Direct. She said she had been sexually assaulted. She gave no full name, but she described enough. A man. A ride. A church. She explained that she had been seeking shelter when it happened. That she had trusted someone who offered help. Then, silence. That tweet would be her last known communication. In the hours that followed, Toyin's phone stopped responding. Friends noticed first. Then strangers. Screenshots of her tweet spread rapidly. People began posting messages, asking if anyone had seen her. Has anyone heard from Toyin? She said she was in trouble. She said someone hurt her. No one had answers. That night, and the morning after, volunteers started to search. Protesters retraced their steps, some returning to the same areas they just marched through. Flyers were printed. Posts were shared. But there were no new leads. No video. No confirmed sightings. Only that final message. Hours turned to days. Meanwhile, in another part of Tallahassee, someone else was also becoming harder to reach. Victoria Sims. 75 years old. Her family tried calling. Texting. Nothing. It was unlike her. She didn't disappear. She didn't go silent. Her car wasn't at home. Her phone rang, then went to voicemail. Her mailbox remained untouched. After a welfare check was requested, officers entered her home. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Her belongings were still there. But she wasn't. The search for her began separately from Toyin's. Different circles. Different assumptions. One young and outspoken. One older and private. But the timelines were beginning to overlap. What no one yet understood, was that these two women, Toyin and Vicky, had crossed paths with the same man. A man who, by that point, had already shown patterns of violence. His name was Aaron Glee Jr. In May, he had been arrested for assaulting another woman. Weeks later, released. By June, he was moving between homes, known to some in the community, but trusted by few. Somehow, both women had encountered him. The reasons were different. The situations were separate. But what came next would tie them together forever. The days that followed became a blur of rumors, failed leads, and growing fear. And no one knew that within just 48 hours of Toyin's final tweet, and Vicky's last text, both women would vanish completely. And when the truth emerged, it would come from behind the same door. It was evening when Oluwatoyin Solo posted her final tweet. She said she had been sexually assaulted earlier that day. She gave no name, but offered details. She had accepted a ride from a man who told her he was a man of God. She had no permanent housing. She needed a place to stay. He offered help. She wrote that she had been taken to a church. That the man had claimed to be protecting her. That hours later, he came back and assaulted her while she was sleeping. That tweet was sent just before 6 p.m. It would be the last time anyone heard from her. At that point, no one knew her real location. No one knew she was no longer at the church. No one knew she was in the custody of a man named Aaron Glee Jr. A 49-year-old with a documented history of violence and arrests. Glee had met Toyin earlier that same day, according to his own later confession. She told him she was homeless. He told her he could help. He took her to his home on Monday Road. Once inside, she wouldn't leave again. Glee admitted that he bound her, kept her in the house for several days, and repeatedly assaulted her. She was never reported as being seen again. While the city searched, while people marched and handed out flyers and asked questions online, she remained in that house. In that room. Alone. Then, another visitor came. On June 10, Victoria Sims, the 75-year-old retired worker and longtime volunteer, arrived at the same address. According to Glee, she had previously helped him, giving him rides, checking on him from time to time. That night, she arrived to check on his mental health. That decision would cost her everything. Glee confessed that he attacked her the moment she entered the house. She had no idea Toyin was inside. She had no idea what had already happened. He claimed he knocked her unconscious and dragged her into another room. Both women were alive in the same house for a short time. But not for long. What occurred inside those walls, how long it lasted, is still not fully known. What authorities do know came from Glee himself, after his arrest. On June 13, Tallahassee police conducted a search at the home. Inside, they discovered the bodies of both women. Toyin and Vicky had been hidden. Autopsy reports later confirmed the trauma. Blunt force. Ligature marks. Clear signs of restraint and prolonged suffering. One of the women had been covered in leaves and bedding. The other placed in a bedroom, partially concealed. It wasn't fast. It wasn't random. It was calculated. And it all happened behind a door that looked like any other in that quiet residential neighborhood. No loud noises. No screaming heard. Just another house, sitting back from the road, trees rising high above the roofline. When officers arrived, the house was empty. Glee had already fled. But what they found inside would unravel everything. Days of silence. 2 names. 2 lives. And one truth, finally uncovered. The crime scene was processed. Evidence collected. But the damage was already done. And by the time it reached the headlines, 2 families had already been changed forever. By the time authorities located the house on Monday Road, too much time had already passed. The search for Oluwatoyin Solo had started days earlier, spurred by online concern and mounting pressure from those closest to her. She hadn't been seen since June 6. Community members, especially those in the activist circles where Toyin was known, pushed hard for action. Flyers were posted. Footage from protests was reviewed. But tips came slowly. Then, when Victoria Sims' name appeared in a separate missing persons report just a few days later, there still wasn't a connection made between the 2 cases. Not yet. Sims had been reported missing by family. She was expected to check in regularly. When she didn't, concern quickly escalated. It wasn't until law enforcement began pulling digital records, location data, phone activity, that the trail began to narrow. One name appeared in connection with both women. Aaron Glee Jr. When police reached the property on June 13, it was already too late. The bodies of both women were discovered inside. The scene told its own story, one written in bruises, in restraint marks, in silence. Glee was gone. But he didn't get far. Days later, he was tracked to a Greyhound bus bound for West Palm Beach. He was arrested in Orlando. The warrant listed multiple charges, including kidnapping, murder, and abuse of a corpse. At first, Glee said little. Then, during interrogation, he began to talk. What followed was a confession filled with detail, cold, deliberate, and difficult to process. He described how he met Toyin, how he offered her shelter, how he kept her in his home. He spoke of Sims, how she came to check on him, how he attacked her, how both women died in that same house. The statements were recorded, entered into evidence, confirmed by physical proof on scene. But Glee didn't stop there. In those same sessions, investigators uncovered another layer. Just weeks before the murders, Glee had been arrested for a separate act of violence. On May 30th, he had been taken into custody after assaulting a woman in the same city. She said he had offered her a place to stay. Once inside, he became aggressive. He had choked her. A neighbor intervened. The police came. Glee was arrested, and then released. That charge was pending when Toyin met him. What investigators began to realize was that this wasn't sudden. It was part of a pattern. A sequence of missed warnings, delayed action, and administrative blind spots. The truth about who Glee was, what he had done, was already in the system. But by the time all the pieces connected, the damage had already been done. The case against him was building quickly now. Phone records. Witness statements. His own words. But with every new document, with every interview, one question remained: how many chances had there been to stop this from happening? In the early hours of June 14, 2020, law enforcement apprehended Aaron Glee Jr. at a Greyhound bus station in Orlando, Florida. He had purchased a ticket to West Palm Beach, attempting to flee the city where two women had recently been reported missing. Upon his arrest, Glee complained of breathing difficulties and was transported to a local hospital. There, under the watch of officers, he made unsolicited admissions. He confessed to the murders of Oluwatoyin Saloe and Victoria Sims. These confessions were not only made to the officers but also during a phone call to his mother, both instances recorded by authorities. Glee was subsequently extradited to Tallahassee, where he faced multiple charges, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and sexual battery. During initial court appearances, he waived his right to remain silent, providing detailed accounts of his actions. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Family members and friends of the victims attended the proceedings, seeking justice for their loved ones. Victim impact statements were read aloud, painting vivid pictures of the lives lost and the void left behind. One friend of Saloe addressed the court, expressing profound grief and anger, stating that consecutive life sentences felt insufficient for the magnitude of the crimes committed. The prosecution and defense eventually reached a plea agreement. Glee pleaded guilty to the charges, thereby avoiding the death penalty. On September 22, 2023, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, along with additional sentences for kidnapping and sexual battery. The sentencing brought a measure of closure to the families, though the pain of their loss remains immeasurable. The courtroom proceedings concluded, but the impact of the crimes continues to resonate within the community. In the days following the discovery of Oluwatoyin Saloe and Victoria Sims, the city of Tallahassee found itself at the center of a national reckoning. Vigils were held across the country. In Miami, mourners gathered beneath the torch of friendship, holding candles and signs bearing Toyin's name. In Tallahassee, a celebration of life was arranged for Victoria Sims, honoring her decades of community service. The city commissioned a Black Lives Matter mural at the intersection of Gaines Street and Railroad Avenue, serving as a lasting tribute to the movement and to those who had given their lives to it. The courtroom proceedings concluded, but the impact of the crimes continues to resonate within the community. 2 women. Different paths, united in death. Oluwatoyin Saloe, a 19-year-old activist, used her voice to advocate for justice, equality, and the protection of Black lives. Her passion resonated with many, yet when she needed protection, the systems failed her. Victoria Sims, a 75-year-old retiree, dedicated her life to community service, volunteering with organizations like AARP and Second Harvest Food Bank. Her commitment to helping others was unwavering, yet she too fell victim to violence. Their stories force us to confront uncomfortable truths, that predators often hide in plain sight, and those who speak out aren't always protected when they do. What would justice even look like in a case like this? Perhaps it's in a continued fight for systemic change, ensuring that voices like Toyin's are heard and protected. Perhaps it's in honoring the legacy of service exemplified by Vicky, by committing ourselves to community and vigilance. Their lives mattered. Their stories must not be forgotten. There are stories we hear. And stories we carry. What happened to Oluwatoyin Salo and Victoria Sims didn't just end in one house, in one city, on one day. It left echoes, in families, in communities, and in the questions that still have no answers. This wasn't a case of being in the wrong place. This was a case of being vulnerable in a world that too often looks away. They were more than names. More than headlines. Toyin, who marched and spoke and refused to be silent. Vicky, who gave her time, her kindness, her care to others. Their stories deserve to be told fully. Without rushing. Without softening the truth. If you found this case as heartbreaking as we did. If you believe their lives mattered. Then help us tell more stories that need to be heard. Hit the like button. Subscribe to this channel, Crime That Haunts. And leave a comment below with your thoughts, or with the name of someone whose story still needs light. We post every week, cases that demand more than curiosity. They demand understanding. Until next time. Stay safe. Stay aware. And never stop asking questions.